All right. So today we'll do a little bit out of chapter 14, and that will be the end of it. So I should be able to finish this today. So we're now focusing on this last bit of the organization of the nervous system that we looked at, the autonomic division. The autonomic division is entirely a motor division. Only motor neurons are part of the autonomic nervous system. So here you see it as a subdivision of the motor or efferent division of the nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system has two main outputs, the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division, and they have sort of opposite effects on the body. So autonomic motor system is entirely a motor division. There are no autonomic sensories. Anything sensory from the visceral organs are lumped into the regular sensory stuff. Now, there are some differences in the autonomic motor versus the regular somatic motor to the skeletal muscles that we talked about. I apologize, I just can't get it to clear up. So hopefully you have your book with you or something to see this a little better. It doesn't even seem in focus now at this point. This is figure 14.2, and across the top we have what we looked at basically in chapter 9, where you had the nerve cells stimulating skeletal muscle cells. You had the cell bodies of these regular motor neurons to your skeletal muscles sit in the central nervous system, either in the brain, where they leave the brain through the cranial nerves, those cranial nerves that had motor components, like the oculomotor nerve would be an example, and then they go with an axon to some skeletal muscle and trigger the contraction of that skeletal muscle. They're in the spinal cord most of the time for everything that's below your neck, basically. And they're all kind of the same. There's one motor neuron in the central nervous system. The axon can be really long, like I gave you the example of a motor neuron in my lower spine that goes all the way to my big toe, to wiggle my big toe. So that's how long they can be. And they're very heavily myelinated, so those are very fast effects because you want to trigger your skeletal muscles, without delay. And the neurotransmitter is always acetylcholine, and it's always a stimulation. So all this stuff that we talked about in chapter 9. Now here, with the autonomic division in the bottom, we have several marked differences. The first big difference is that here, the motor stimulation is always a two-neuron chain. So here we have one neuron going directly to the skeletal muscle. Now we have one neuron connects to second neuron. Then you're at the effector organ. Okay, two neuron chains. That's a big difference. And the first neuron sits in the central nervous system just like your regular motor neurons, but the second one in that two-neuron chain is further away. It's not inside the central nervous system, and they sit inside ganglia. Here's the term ganglion, if you can make it out. Ganglion. So the second neuron cell body is not in the central nervous system. Those are found in ganglia. Remember the definition of in the nervous system of a ganglion is a lump of nerve cell bodies outside the central nervous system, right? That was our definition. And so with these two neuron chains, where did I label it? There, pre-ganglionic versus post-ganglionic. Okay, so there's a pre-ganglionic neuron in front of the ganglion, a post-ganglionic neuron or axon that's extending from the ganglion to the effector organ. So these two neuron chains. There's only one example where that is not exactly true, and that is when the autonomic nervous system innervates the adrenal gland. And in particular, the adrenal medulla. The medulla is the center of the adrenal gland. And the adrenal medulla is where that preganglionic neuron ends. And then the adrenal medulla releases hormones into the bloodstream when it gets stimulated. Now, the adrenal medulla developmentally is derived from nervous tissue, so it still kind of resembles an autonomic ganglion. It doesn't have any axons come out of it. And we'll look at what that does. But generally, we have these two neuron chains, preganglionic, postganglionic. The neurotransmitters are different. This one is norepinephrine. It used to be called noradrenaline. And what channels open and so on. Now, so our first big difference is the two neuron thing. The second big difference is the neurotransmitter is not acetylcholine all the time. The third one is the effector organs. Now we're not going to smooth muscle, we're going to internal organ, not going to skeletal muscle, we're going to smooth muscle in the internal organs. So chapter 9 we went to skeletal muscle, now we're going to smooth muscle in the walls of your inner organs. That includes the blood vessels, that includes the wall of the digestive tract, and it also goes to cardiac muscle of the heart, and it goes to glands. Those are supposed to be the glands, I guess, on the diagram. So the effector organs are different, not the skeletal muscle, but smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. Fourth difference, instead of always stimulating, now we also have the ability to inhibit. So stimulatory or inhibitory effects depending on the neurotransmitter and the effector organs. So there are quite a few differences here between the regular motor division to the skeletal muscles and the autonomic. Do you want me to run through those differences again one more time, just real quick? See if you got them all down. So one was, instead of one neuron directly to target, we have a two neuron chain. Okay. We have different neurotransmitters other than just acetylcholine, so there's some potential others. One important one, norepinephrine. There is a different target, not skeletal muscle, but smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or glands. And then lastly, not just stimulatory, can be inhibitory as well. Okay? So those are our differences. Here is a diagram that shows how the autonomic motor nerve endings are actually divided up depending on the subdivision. We have two subdivisions, as we saw in that chart, the parasympathetic versus the sympathetic division. Now overall, the parasympathetic division is called the rest and digest. And the sympathetic that is called the fight or flight. Division of the autonomic nervous system. And they sort of activate your body exactly fitting with those names. Rest and digest, you're going to stimulate the internal motility of your digestive organs, saliva release, that kind of stuff, sexuality. Sympathetic, fight or flight, completely the opposite. You're going to inhibit your internal organs, you inhibit your kidneys so you don't have to go to the bathroom. and you're increasing your heart rate and things like that, so to kind of fight off an intruder. If you ever had an adrenaline rush because of some situation, that is your fight or flight response, okay? Laying on the couch after Thanksgiving, rest and digest. Now, they're compartmentalized where they leave or attach to, or come off of, maybe I should say, the central nervous system. The rest and digest, the parasympathetic, comes off the central nervous system up here, brainstem, or all the way down here in the sacral region. And the sympathetic comes off in the middle, sort of thoracic and lumbar region of the spinal cord. So here we have these origins. So parasympathetic, this is called the craniosacral origin, and the sympathetic has the thoracolumbar origin of the central nervous system. Craniosacral versus thoracolumbar.
Is there any chance you could write those on the board? I can't.
Is it that it's bad, isn't
Yeah.
it? Let me erase this. So parasympathetic, craniosacral, and the sympathetic is thoracolumbar. Is that legible? Now, where are the locations of the ganglia? The ganglia that second neuron sits in, they have, for the parasympathetic, the ganglia are located in or near the visceral organs that they innervate. They're near or inside the organ, in the wall of the organ. They're called intramural ganglia, a lot intramural within the walls. Right? You've all heard of intramural sports, I assume, right? You're playing only the people in your college. The sympathetic has the ganglia in what is called the sympathetic chain. This is very close to the spinal cord. Sympathetic chain near the spinal cord, or some of them are in ganglia sort of by the aorta. The big blood vessel that runs through your abdomen. So for the parasympathetic, since the ganglia are basically at the target, you have pretty long preganglionic neurons and really short itty-bitty postganglionic ones, and here it's a bit more equal. So when the ganglia are right by the spinal cord, just outside of it, then you have a short preganglionic and then a much longer postganglionic neuron. So here you see a more enlarged region of the cranial outflow of the parasympathetic. This is 14.4. So again, rest and digest, so you're lowering energy output and you're upping the digestive processes and elimination. So we can look at some of these effectors. You don't have to know what the names of these ganglia are. So this is the cranial outflow. Here's a preganglionic neuron to ganglion and then to the target. Here we go to the eye. With the eye for autonomic, remember this is all involuntary stuff. So now we're looking at dilating a pupil, for example. Dilating the pupils, or constricting the pupils, for close-up vision type of things. So pupil movement on the eye. We have input into the tear gland and the nose, the lining of the nose, that increases secretion for sort of digestive purposes in the back of the throat, the lacrimal gland for lubricating the eyeballs. We're going to, these are salivary glands, so we're increasing outflow from the salivary glands for digestion when you're eating food. So that's all of these are salivary glands, so increasing secretion of saliva. Heart rate is slowed down. The lungs slow down, so we're constricting the air passages in the lung. You're not needing a lot of gas exchange for rest and digest. So pupil changes, moistening the nose and lacrimal glands, tear glands, salivary glands, increasing output, decreased heart rate, decreased lung ventilation. In the sacral part, so here's the sacral outflow, digestive processes are stimulated. So all of these things are stimulated. So for example, in the gallbladder, we've not talked about this as ANP2 stuff, but the liver and gallbladder are part of the digestive organs. They produce bile that help you digest fats. So they are stimulated, and the liver also takes up nutrients and deals with nutrients that you're absorbing after a meal. So all of those functions are stimulated. The stomach starts to churn, mix things up as it comes down. The pancreas is a digestive organ that releases digestive enzymes into the gut to break them down. Intestine needs to have intestinal motility to deal with the food as it moves through. Rectum for elimination, urinary bladder elimination, genitalia, sexual arousal, and stimulation are all part of the parasympathetic nervous system. If you're in a fight or flight response, you're not going to think about arousal. So you need to be in that rest and digest kind of mode. The sympathetic, this is the same stuff we already wrote down. So the thoracolumbar origin, and here's some examples of what that does. We have again to the eye, so now we're dilating the pupil, we're afraid, right? Your eyes open up. Lacrimal gland, nasal mucosa kind of dry up. So if you're in the fight or flight response, you get that dry mouth feeling also. Salivary glands inhibited. So everything sort of dries up and your eyes bug out. The heart and lungs, now we're increasing heart rate and we're increasing airflow into the lung so you can deal with a threatening situation and hopefully fight somebody off. The skin has kind of interesting effects. We're kind of getting the blood out of the skin to make it available to the skeletal muscles. So you turn pale and yet you start sweating. So you get sort of this cold, clammy condition to your skin. The muscles that attach to your hair follicles will constrict and give you goosebumps when you're in full sympathetic mode. And already talked, you start to sweat, so cold sweat, goosebumps from the skin, and the heart rate goes up, and the air passages dilate in the lung, so you get oxygen to fight. Here's the other half of this diagram. So now for fight or flight, you're not going to want to use resources for digestion, so we're inhibiting the digestive organs. The liver will actually release nutrients at this point, but digestion in the stomach, churning, the intestine motility is all reduced. Let's go down here. So elimination, you don't want to have to go to the bathroom. And sexual arousal is inhibited if you are in a fight or flight response. But curiously, actually, if you are sexually active for that arousal phase, you need the parasympathetic stimulation, so you have to be laid back. But orgasm is actually a switch to a sympathetic burst of activity from the central nervous system. So that actually has sort of this dual thing going on with sexuality. That's why sometimes in men with erectile dysfunction, the erectile dysfunction drugs actually work on the physicality of blood vessel constriction and dilation, stuff like that in the penis, but they don't work up here. So you can still have the erectile dysfunction in men, even on Viagra or something like that, because you need that parasympathetic rest and digest to be able to get an erection, not just the plumbing has to be right. And then for ejaculation, you switch to the sympathetic. And in women with orgasm too, so when women have the arousal, parasympathetic, orgasm, sympathetic, you get that switch. Now I do want to mention here the adrenal medulla sits on top of the kidney. That was our one example where there isn't really a postganglionic neuron, but the adrenal medulla is kind of like a ganglion. And when it gets stimulated, the adrenal medulla releases large amounts of norepinephrine and epinephrine. So it releases norepinephrine and epinephrine into the bloodstream, and that enhances the fight or flight response greatly because those are basically noradrenaline and adrenaline, is what they used to be called, and going all over your system give you that adrenaline rush feeling, and you get sort of this global body activation during the sympathetic fight or flight response. So the adrenal medulla is a major player in the fight or flight response. Now, if you need to double check any of the stuff I talked about, I didn't focus on every single detail. So if you need to look something up, you can use this table 14.4, table 14.4. Okay, so if you need to look up, okay, I didn't quite catch what you said about parasympathetic versus sympathetic to the eye, you can go and look it up there, okay? So when you're going over your notes, you can double check all that information that you just wrote down. There's probably more on here that I didn't necessarily all talk about, but from your notes, go and double check here, okay? If something is unclear, there's some more there, so it's quite a big table. All right, I did mention visceral reflexes briefly in the last chapter when we went over the knee-jerk reflex. Here's an example of a visceral reflex that we can have also. We have a receptor in the viscera somewhere. Let's say we're talking about the stomach. The stomach wall has stretch receptors. You eat a big meal, that stomach gets stretched out, that sensory information is sent into the spinal cord, and then there is an autonomic nervous system output. Don't worry about why it takes this strange route. We're not talking about that part in chapter 14. And take-home message down here, you're going through some visceral effector and you have some response. Like in my example of the stomach will then start secreting juices and start churning and mixing that stuff up. So we do have reflexes through the spinal cord for the autonomic nervous system also, not just the skeletal muscle stuff that we talked about. All right, so some generalities about the autonomic nervous system division. For most visceral organs, so everything in your body cavity, most of your visceral organs, we have dual innervation, meaning there's both parasympathetic and sympathetic input. So both divisions will go there, like the eye, we have parasympathetic and sympathetic input to the eye for the pupil size, and this is true for a lot of the organs. Now, I've not really focused on blood vessels, but blood vessels have pretty much only sympathetic innervation. If you need to increase your blood pressure during a fight or flight response, the blood vessels are being told to constrict, so they change the diameter, they narrow the diameter of the blood vessels, and that makes your plumbing tighter, and that raises your blood pressure to fight off potential attackers or whatever your fight response is for. You also go into a fight or flight response if you had a major injury, you go into shock. So you go into fight or flight response and constrict everything to raise your blood pressure. The heart, the digestive tract, and the urinary tract, they do have a dominance of the parasympathetic, and the sympathetic innervation is there, but it only really kicks in if there's a major event. In an emergency, the sympathetic kicks in and spikes your heart rate and gets you out of harm's way, hopefully. With the genitalia, we need the cooperative effects, like I kind of talked about. So for sexual activity, you need first the parasympathetic to have arousal, and then you need to switch to sympathetic for orgasm and ejaculation. So we need both. And then lastly, the adrenal medulla. And in the adrenal medulla, this is really for the sympathetic stimulation. So you get a large output of norepinephrine and epinephrine that then enter the bloodstream and go all over and lead to sort of this global adrenaline rush type of activation of all your systems. So your metabolic rate even goes up if you have output of those hormones. Now, the parasympathetic effects overall, there's not a lot of branching, so the effects are fairly targeted, and we use mostly acetylcholine for the parasympathetic effects. And so if you're looking at the stomach, for example, it will just stimulate the stomach or just stimulate the intestine to deal with food. And it's really fairly targeted. And then for the sympathetic, we have much more branching of those neurons to various targets, So it's a much more widespread effect. And then because of the norepinephrine and the epinephrine from the adrenal medulla, it really takes over your body. So the fight or flight response really is a global thing. And it lasts longer too, because these neurotransmitters, if they're in your blood, from the adrenal gland, they circulate and they stay around, and they don't get destroyed until they reach the liver, where the liver can take care of them, so they stay around for a while. When you get this fight or flight response, it's a little bit longer term than any parasympathetic stimulation. Okay, and I think that is it. This should be the last slide. Yes, so we're done. So do you want to meet on Wednesday for any reason? If you have questions, you can email me, yes. I found review sessions not very helpful because people just sit there and they don't say anything. They don't have any questions.
On the syllabus, it says that the final's on the 9th, on a Thursday, at 8 a.m.
I think that's true, yeah.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, because it's tough to get here at 8. So remember, it's at 8, not at 9.
On Thursday, though. Thursday.
Yeah, and it's the wrong day and the wrong time. And that's always kind of, people tend to kind of screw that up sometimes. Yes?
How much of the finals can be new stuff and then new stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question, because everything got sort of put, like the last was just on that one chapter, and this is just going to be the nervous system stuff now for new stuff. So that was chapter, 11, 12, 13, and then this little bit on 14. So that should be enough to come up with about 50 questions on that, but I won't care. I won't know for sure. So there'll be a chunk of this new stuff, and that would be the biggest part of the final. And then there'll be 25 old questions, just sort of random. And I'm not going to go to the tests I gave you already and make sure I pick only from those questions. And I'm also not going to try and make sure I don't duplicate a question. I'll just go back to my questions that I've made up over the years and use those. So you may, by accident, get the same one again you've had on the test, but you may get new ones too on that old material. Okay? So usually I have 75 on the final. And I should be able to make that. And if I make 75, there'll be 50 on this nervous system stuff and 25 old. Any other questions on that?
So we don't have class Wednesday or Friday this week?
No.
Not until Thursday next week?
Not until the final, yeah. So don't go on vacation yet.
And the final is
Yes, the final is in this room, but it is at 8. Yes. I might still be sleeping halfway when I'm there.